Ones who need it worst. Let the rest of the world help us for change, and let's rebuild the very first. Our highways and bridges are falling apart. Who's blessed? Who has been cursed? There's things to be done all over the world, but let's rebuild America first.
Wow. It is great to be in Michigan again. God bless you guys. Thank you all. Now, I think that you guys really like to have me here because there's nothing better than making a Buckeye come up north and beg you for your vote, and I do it every single week. And you all are nice and friendly to me, but I know in the back of your minds you're saying, well, we're still going to beat them at football in November. We'll see about that. We'll see about that. 3 years in a row, unfortunately, but we'll see if you can make it a fourth. But regardless, we're going to win the race that really matters and send Donald J. Trump back to the White House on November 5th. Now, I want to give a special shout out, first of all, to all of you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for joining us today. I do want to recognize the great Pete Hoekstra, the chairman of the GOP here in Michigan. Pete, thank you for everything, man. Pete's getting to be like a drinking buddy at this point. We hang out once a week. It's just kind of, we do it every single week. I want to call out the founder of the Grassroots Army, Garrett Soldano. Garrett, thank you so much for everything you're doing, man. Could not do this without every single person in this room, especially Garrett's hard work, because, again, we have got the media that does not want to tell the truth about this race and doesn't want to tell the truth about Kamala Harris, but we have got people power on the side of Donald J. Trump, and that's going to carry the day on November the 5th. Now, I don't know if you've seen, but Kamala Harris still continues to run and hide from the media. And I think she's given now two interviews. She's been the presumptive Democrat nominee, and she gives 2 interviews. And it's funny, when she gives these interviews, you actually pay attention to what she's saying. She doesn't answer the question. They'll say, Kamala, what's your plan to lower inflation? And she'll say, well, when I worked at McDonald's, I really liked making hash browns. They'll say, Kamala Harris, how are you going to lower energy and housing prices for American consumers? And she said, did you know that I grew up in a middle-class family? Well, that's cool, but can you answer the question about how you're going to make the lives of the American people better? And the answer is, of course, she can't, because her policies have caused every single problem we've seen in this country over the last 3.5 years. Exploding inflation, that's on Kamala Harris. Groceries you can't afford, that's on Kamala Harris. Housing that is unaffordable for young American families, that is on Kamala Harris. And a wide open border, that's on Kamala Harris too. So let's say to Kamala Harris, you're fired. We're not sending you to the White House. Get out of Washington, D.C., and go back to San Francisco, because she is a San Francisco liberal at heart, and that's clearly where she ought to be. But, the thing is, the American people, even though Kamala Harris talks to them like they're children, Donald Trump and I talk to the American people in a different way. We talk to them like they are our fellow citizens who deserve to be persuaded by the person who wants to be their next president and vice president. So let's talk a little bit about public policy. But before I do that, I want to just address the elephant in the room here, which is, of course, just a couple of days ago, my running mate, my dear friend and our next president, was nearly assassinated again. 2 assassination attempts in as many months. And I think that it's time to say to the Democrats, to the media, to everybody that has been attacking this man and trying to censor this man for going on 10 years, cut it out, or you're going to get somebody killed. Now, I actually, of course, heard about the news before almost anybody else. I was sitting at home with my son, and we were doing, what we always do when my wife's not around. We were playing video games. We get that like 1 hour. All right, we can play video games, and then before mom comes back, we got to cut that crap out. Sorry, honey. I just told on myself. But we're sitting there, and I get a phone call. It says Donald J. Trump, so I answer it. And he says, JD, you won't believe it. They just tried to do it again. I said, what did they try to do? He said, well, they just tried to shoot me again. And I said, what? No way. I almost couldn't believe it when he first told me. And I said, oh, my God, sir, I'm so glad you're okay. But, you're physically okay. Clearly, you wouldn't be calling me. Are you okay in all the ways that matter? And he said, yeah, I'm doing fine. And that's just who he is. He just gets shot, almost shot a second time, and he's totally fine. He was a little annoyed about one thing, though. He was mad because he was on the 6th hole and he was about to make a birdie putt. And he said, I'm kind of pissed off they wouldn't let me finish my birdie. I was having the round of my life. And I said, well, okay, sir, I think it makes sense, though, that they got you off the golf course. But, it goes to show there is a difference in leadership style. There is a guy who takes a bullet to the head and stands up and says, fight, fight, fight. There is a guy who takes a second almost assassination attempt and responds to it with grace and good humor. And then there's a woman who is terrified of the American media. Who do we think ought to be the president of the United States? Donald J. Trump. That's right. And how nice is it, by the way, to have a presidential candidate and, of course, a former president that we can be proud of, that we can believe in, and that is tough enough to take the slings and arrows but still be fighting every single day for the American people. That's what he's done, and that's what he'll continue to do. So let's talk about exactly what that's going to look like. Because, look, we all know that the reason why groceries are unaffordable, the reason why Americans can't afford to buy a home is because Kamala Harris has refused to do her job. And, my friends, I was actually yesterday with my dear friend Katie Britt, senator from Alabama, and both of us have been in politics for all of 2 years. And we were talking about how shameless these politicians are, where I guess if you've been in office for 30 years, like Kamala Harris, you can stand up and without an ounce of shame look at the American people and say, on day one, I'm going to lower grocery prices. That's what Kamala Harris says. And on day one, we're going to lower the price of housing. And on day one, we're going to close down that southern border. It's like, Kamala, day one was 1,400 days ago. What the hell have you been doing the whole time? Why don't you stop talking and get to work? Let's just compare and contrast the specific policy, because the American people deserve to have people who are going to talk about the public policies that are going to make their life better. Kamala Harris cast the deciding vote on the Inflation Explosion Act. It's the biggest driver of inflation in the United States today. Kamala Harris cast the tie-breaking vote for it. And of course, when Donald J. Trump was president, inflation was 1.5% and wages were going up. When Kamala Harris became the vice president and the border czar, she said, we're going to suspend all deportations. We're going to decriminalize all illegal immigration, and we are going to stop Donald Trump's wildly successful Remain in Mexico policy. That flooded the United States with a ton of illegal immigrants. And you know what those illegal immigrants did? They compete with Americans for scarce homes. And the Donald J. Trump plan is that American housing ought to go to American citizens, not people who shouldn't even be in this country to begin with. Because that deporting those illegal immigrants, it's not just about law and order, as important as that is. It's about lowering the cost of housing for American citizens, and that's what we have to fight to do. You've got young people in this country today who are paupers in their own nation. They've got a ton of debt. They're borrowing a lot, but they have no chance of owning a stake in their own country. The American dream of homeownership is completely out of reach for millions of young Americans. And when Donald J. Trump is president, that's going to stop. We're going to fight for their American dreams. We're going to fight for young people to be able to buy a home. And we're going to stop sending American homes to foreigners. Now, we all know in the great state of Michigan that the most important driver of inflation is energy, right? You make energy more expensive, you make gas at the pump more expensive, but you also make food more expensive, because who drives that food to the grocery store? It's our truck drivers. And if they're paying more for gasoline and diesel, then all of us are paying more for food. And if they're paying more to send construction materials and lumber at the construction site, then we're all paying more for housing. The number one thing we've got to do to get control of this crazy inflation and drive down the cost of everything is to unleash American energy. Drill, baby, drill. And of course, thanks to Kamala Harris, we are going to war against American energy instead of the tin pot dictators that we're now buying oil and natural gas from. Think about this. Think about what we have in the United States of America. We got natural resources that Russia and China and every other nation in the world would die for. They would love to have the abundant American energy that we've got right here in our own territory. So why don't we say on November to Kamala Harris, let's stop buying oil and gas from tin pot dictators all over the world. Let's buy it from our own people right here in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, in the United States of America. And here's what Donald Trump is going to do. On day one, we are going to unleash American energy once again. On day one, we are going to start building more homes again so that young people can afford the American dream of homeownership. On day one, we are going to implement a very, very simple tax policy. You know, Kamala Harris, she wants to raise taxes on American workers and then reward companies that ship American jobs overseas. And I think that gets it exactly upside down. Donald Trump and I, we're going to cut taxes for American workers, and we're going to raise tariffs on companies that are shipping jobs overseas. And all of this, my friends, it's going to do so much to lower the cost of goods. It's going to make our country more prosperous. It's going to make our country more free. You know, we got to get out of this mindset, the Kamala Harris mindset, that we can rely on other countries to make the things that we need. You go to a grocery store, you go to a pharmacy, and it is shocking how much everything that we buy in this country is very often made by people, some people who don't even like us, by the way. You know, 95% of the ibuprofen that we take in this country, you know where it's manufactured? China. You know where a lot of the antibiotics that we put in the bodies of our children are manufactured? China. Now, Kamala Harris is trying to make us buy more and more Chinese-made electric vehicles. This is the greatest auto-producing state in the whole country, which makes it the capital of the great American automobile. Let's buy more cars in Michigan, not in some foreign country. And of course, we know that when we buy American, when we make American, it leads to higher wages, it leads to lower prices, and it leads to more self-reliance. Donald Trump wants young Americans wage when they do a good day's work so that they can live the American dream. Kamala Harris wants to ship everybody's job off to China and then turn them into welfare dependents. That is not a path to prosperity. That is a path to slavery, and it's what Kamala Harris has been doing for 3.5 years. So we're going to take some questions from the media in a second, but I just want to send a message to everybody in this room, to everybody who's watching on television, to those of you who will see the clips afterwards. We are going to make this country more prosperous again. We're going to make the American dream more affordable again. We are going to make America great again, and it's going to start right here in the state of Michigan. God bless you guys. Thank you for having us, and thank you for doing what you're doing. Thank you all. Thank you. Please, please. So we'll take a few questions from reporters, and I always do this because I actually think that American political candidates ought to talk to the media, unlike Kamala Harris. But what I like to do is to start with the local Michigan reporters. We'll have some folks back there pointing them out, and then if we've got time afterwards, we'll take some questions from the national pool as well. So I think I've got one question right there in the back.
Beth LeBlanc with the Detroit News. Quick question. I know you've mentioned that we're too reliant on Chinese-made electric vehicles. What do you think about bringing some of that manufacturing back to Michigan. Some of the incentives recently for Goshen or for the Ford Marshall project, they're saying they're trying to accomplish that. I guess, how do you address that or respond to it?
Well, I think the most important thing that we want to do is we want to manufacture in the United States of America, but we want American workers and American companies to do it, right? That's part of the problem with the Goshen facility. But look, the Inflation Explosion Act, which is really a green energy scam act, what Kamala Harris did in that legislation is they put hundreds of billions of dollars of subsidies for electric vehicles, but they didn't do anything to really guarantee those electric vehicles would be made in the United States of America. So think about how little sense this makes. We're going to tax American citizens and give a bunch of money away to rich people to buy electric cars made in China. It's the dumbest economic policy in the history of this country, and we've done a lot of stupid things over the last 40 years. But the crazy thing here is you could have a totally different approach to economic policy, and that's what Donald Trump did. That's why his economic policies worked so well, and that is his plan for what to do again. Now, Kamala Harris, it's so funny to me. She keeps on talking about how she's got a plan to fix all these problems. And like I said, the obvious question is, well, if you got this great plan, why don't you do it right now? You're the vice president right now. Go do something with all that power the American people gave you. The second point I make is she says she has all these great plans. Well, what are they? Because every time she talks with any detail, which is very rarely, about her policy, she just sounds like Donald Trump. She copies it's like she went on President Trump's website and copied every single one of his viewpoints, even though she's governed the exact opposite. And this is a person who said she wanted to ban fracking, and now she says she supports fracking. This is a person who said that she wants a secure border, even though her policies opened up the American southern border. She wants to support American energy, even though her policies, she's gone to war against American energy. Kamala Harris and what she says and how she's governed are two totally different people. We've never had a faker, more fraudulent person run for president of the United States, and we got to remind people of that every single day. So to put it simply, we want to cut taxes on American workers. We want to reward companies that are making things in the United States of America. And if you want to make something in China using Chinese slave labor, you're going to have to pay a big fat tariff before your products come back in the United States of America. Next question.
Hi, JD. This is Autumn Pitcher with News Channel 3 out of Kalamazoo, Michigan. With the former assassination attempt on former President Trump, are you and Trump considering having campaign events inside moving forward? And then also, was this event inside today because of that?
So I believe this event, that you'd have to ask the organizers, we'll follow up with you afterwards. I believe this event was already planned to be inside, so I don't think there's any change in security. By the way, with close to 500 patriots in the state of Michigan in this building right now and outside, I'd like to see an assassin try to come in this room. They come to the wrong place if you try to walk into this place right now. And while we're on that topic, by the way, I know we've got a couple hundred people outside. I want to give them a shout out. I'm sorry you couldn't make it. I'm sorry we hit capacity, but God bless you guys. I know you can hear me. You can't see me, but I'm grateful to you. But look, fundamentally, there's some risk inherent in this. I think the president has showed this, and I think that I'm trying to follow his example, which is when an assassin tried to take him down in Butler, PA, just about 6 weeks ago. He didn't hide in a basement. He didn't run away from the American people. He said, you know what? I want to be the people's president, so I got to get out there and talk to him. And that's what I'm going to keep on doing. And yes, there are some risks related to Secret Service detail. I thank these guys every day for what they do. God bless you. But we're going to keep on getting out there talking to the American people because that's what they deserve. If you are too afraid to talk to a friendly media reporter, then you shouldn't be the people's president of the United States. It's the story of Kamala Harris's campaign. She wants to lead the United States of America. She wants to be in a private room with Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, but she's terrified of the friendly American press corps. It's a total disgrace, and I'm never going to follow her example. I'm going to follow Donald J. Trump's example. Get out there and talk to people. Now, Now, since he asked the question, I do want to say just one other thing about that, which is number one, there have been 2 attempts on his life in just a couple of months. Donald Trump ought to have the same detail as Joe Biden. That is a policy choice that our federal government has decided that Donald Trump deserves a lesser level of protection. Maybe with any normal formal president, that makes sense. It clearly doesn't meet the challenge of what Donald J. Trump is dealing with. So we ought to bump up his security. We, of course, want to be as careful as possible, and we want to make it so that we cut out the ridiculous rhetoric that I think has put a giant target on Donald Trump's back. Now, I have to say this because, look, whether Republicans do a better job at showing respect, at trying to debate our differences without, going into personal attacks. But the media trying to both sides this issue after 2 people have taken a swing at Donald J. Trump's life is ridiculous. Don't lecture Donald Trump about softening his rhetoric after 2 people tried to kill him. It's ridiculous. Tell Kamala Harris, tell Joe Biden, tell all of her surrogates who are saying things like Donald Trump needs to be eliminated. They need to cut that crap out or they're going to get somebody hurt. In fact, they already did get somebody hurt. Corey Compertori lost his life. 2 other people nearly lost their lives in Butler, PA, because these guys have let the rhetoric in this country get totally out of control. I don't believe in censorship. I don't believe in trying to shut people up. I believe in debating people. But what these guys have tried to do every single time they get an opportunity, they want to throw them in prison. They want to kick them off social media. They want to do everything that they can to silence Donald Trump, and they send that signal with every action that they take. Well, if you're trying to silence Donald Trump and you're sending the message, we have to do everything that we can to silence Donald Trump, a crazy person is eventually going to take that message to heart. Thank God nothing truly tragic has happened to Donald Trump. Problem. Democrats have got to cut this crap out, respect their fellow Americans, debate our differences. Don't try to get your Don't try to censor your political opponents, because censorship will eventually lead to political violence. We've seen that now twice in the last couple of months, and I hope Democrats learn the lesson. Next question.
Hi, Senator. Riley Connell with WILX News 10 in Lansing. You spoke a few moments ago about some of those day one tax cut plans for the American people. Can you talk a little bit more about what that plan might look like, what it might look like for folks in Michigan, some of those plans to cut costs for folks maybe right here in the audience?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Kamala Harris has said explicitly that she wants to raise your taxes because she wants to let the Trump tax cuts expire. And we know that the people who benefited the most from those tax cuts were working and middle-class Michiganders, people in this room. So Kamala Harris is actually promising a massive tax increase. I talk to the president about this all the time. It's funny, normally politicians, even if they don't mean it, they'll go around and Kamala Harris will say, well, I'm going to cut your taxes. Well, she's actually saying we're going to let the Donald Trump tax cuts expire. She's explicitly running on a promise to raise taxes. It's the dumbest political move, but it will tank this economy and will make life even more unaffordable for Michiganders. It's a disaster, and that's why we've got to renew those tax cuts. But when we talk about prices, this is very, very important. The Kamala Harris administration has implemented about $900 billion worth of regulations in this country. And who do we think that falls on? The people in this room, people all across the state of Michigan. They're the ones who suffer when you create $900 billion worth of regulations. Who suffers when you jack up the cost of energy to a level it's never been before in this country? It's everybody, because everything requires energy, right? So when you increase the cost of energy, you increase the cost of housing, you increase the cost of food, and you, of course, increase the cost of people's utility bills. And all those things have, as everybody in this room will attest, all those things have gone up because of Kamala Harris's policies. We could lower prices on day one if we just unleashed American energy. It's the most important thing that we can do to make life more affordable in this country. Donald J. Trump and I are going to do it, and it's actually simple. Because sometimes public policy is complicated, but sometimes all we have to do is undo the regulations on American energy started by Kamala Harris. We do that, life will become more affordable for the people in this room and all across the state. We've got to do it. Thank you all. Next question, sir.
Good afternoon, Senator Vance. Arpan Lobo with the Detroit Free Press. You mentioned about the need for border security. States that have lost population or experienced slow population growth, like Michigan, have turned to immigrants in a way to kind of maintain economic competitiveness. I wanted to ask you, is there a plan, if President Trump were to be reelected under your administration, to balance the border security, but also address like economic viability in places like Michigan, which have made efforts to attract legal immigrants to bolster economic competitiveness?
Well, look, I reject the idea. I reject the idea that there is some sort of tension between securing your border and having economic growth. If you look at the history of this country, we had a very, very strong border and a rapidly growing economy. It's only in the last 20, 30 years where American leaders decided we should open the floodgates. And what have we seen over the last 20 to 30 years? Declining standards of living. If the solution to our economic growth problems was to import millions and millions of illegal immigrants, then every country in Europe would be doing a lot better than they are right now. And frankly, the United States would be doing better today than it was 4 years ago. We're doing worse today than 4 years ago because we allowed this flood of migration. Now, the other thing that I think the question betrays a certain misunderstanding on, sir, is look, why have people left Michigan? I talk to this all the time. Two reasons. When I talk to people, you just heard a bunch of people shouted out the answer. It's consistent with everything that I've heard. Why have people left Michigan in the last 15, 20 years? Two things: high taxes and a lack of good jobs. So the idea that the solution to a lack of jobs is to import a lot more people who are going to compete with Michiganders for the jobs that are here. No, create more jobs. That's how you bring people back to Michigan. And most importantly, thank you. I thought that was a pretty good answer. I didn't think it was a very good answer. That was a hell of a response to that one. But one other just point on that question, sir, is look, we in this country have run an experiment of importing millions and millions of people instead of building economic development right here at home. And I think it's a huge mistake, and we've got to go in the other direction. There are a lot, I'm sure, of parents and grandparents in here who love this community, who would like their children to be able to get a good job and start a family in this community, not to have to move either to Detroit or more likely completely outside the state just to have a good opportunity and a good life. The only way to do that is to promote economic development in our rural areas, let our farmers do what they need to do, and build more manufacturing in the United States of America. We just are not going to create prosperity with more and more cheap labor. We're going to create prosperity with more and more jobs for more and more American workers. Next question.
Hi, Danielle James with MLive. I'm curious, and I want to touch back on the multiple assassination attempts against the former president. You talked about rhetoric contributing to these assassination attempts. Do you believe this rhetoric from Democrats is one-sided? And is there anything that can be done to combat it and promote civility within your party?
Well, look, do I think the rhetoric is all one-sided? Of course not. Right? There are absolutely people on our side who say things that I think are ridiculous that they shouldn't say. But what is one-sided is that our guy is the one who keeps getting shot at. That's what's one-sided. And I think that, you know, for all the Democrats, and I understand where this impulse comes from. I understand where this desire to say, well, everybody needs to do better. Look, I'm running as vice president. I agree. I can sometimes do better, but we have to remember Donald Trump is the one getting shot at. So if you are running, look, if people had taken an attempt on Kamala Harris's life, I would be looking in the mirror and saying, how could we do a lot better? But here we are. Two people have now tried to assassinate Donald Trump, and all the media can talk about is we need more censorship, and they're still talking about Donald Trump as if he's a threat that needs to be eliminated. They haven't learned a damn thing, and they're going to get somebody killed. They've got to stop this. They've got to stop it. Sir.
My name is Josh Berry, WXMI Fox 17. Each one of the candidates at the top of the two tickets have made their way to West Michigan. We're going to see you all likely again before the election. Having talked to people at both of these rallies, I'm wondering, do you gauge support based on these competing rallies in this area? And do you see a disconnect as the candidate between supporters who would go to a Tim Walz rally at a museum in downtown Grand Rapids versus supporters here at a rally for you in a barn in rural Sparta?
Well, no, I don't see a disconnect. I think there's nothing wrong with having a rally in a barn, right? But look, there's nothing wrong with having a rally in a museum. And if you look at what we've been doing, I've been to downtown Grand Rapids, I think twice now in this campaign, just in the last few weeks. And we've been in rural parts of Michigan. We've been in urban parts of Michigan, suburban parts. We're going to go everywhere because I think you ought to try to earn every person's vote. And that's how Donald Trump and I think about this race. Now, look, I'm a realist about politics. Any campaign, there's two things you're trying to do. You're trying to persuade swing voters, right? People who haven't yet decided. And my argument to swing voters is simple. You've got two very different records. Donald Trump's record was peace and prosperity, no wars, lower inflation, rising wages, and Kamala Harris has been chaos all over the world. She can't answer a single question without sounding like a whatever. And she's had policies that have made it impossible for people to afford housing and food in the country that all of us love. So the records are totally different. That's my argument to swing voters. My argument to voters who are already going to vote for us, but of course this is the second part of any political campaign, is we got to get out there and actually vote. And I know every single person in this room, every single one of us knows at least one person who's going to vote for Donald J. Trump, but only if they actually go to the polls. Okay? Every single one of us has a responsibility to call that person, to offer to drive that person, and make sure that every single one of us gets out there and makes our voice heard on November 5th. That's what we have to do. Or before November 5th, right? Because we know that Democrats have beaten us in early voting for a long time. I don't like the idea that we have election season. I think we ought to have election day in this country, but whether we like it or not, we've got election season, so we might as well take advantage of it, or the Democrats are ultimately going to win this race. Now, think about this. I've seen this play out in every race that I've ever been involved in, where I've got friends of mine who are running. It's like you take 100 people, and 95 of them, 100 people are going to vote for Donald Trump, or 100 people who are going to vote for whatever candidate that I think they should vote for. 95 of them eventually do it, and then 5 of them wait until election day, and then what happens? Well, mom gets sick, so you got to go and take her to the hospital. Or the kid, you got to go pick him up from school. Or maybe something comes up at work unexpected and you're there too late and you don't get an opportunity to make your voice heard. We've got to take advantage of every single thing that we have. And I know Pete Hoekstra will talk about this, has talked about this. We have got to get out there and make our voices heard. Now, I'll tell you, a Senate colleague, one of my favorite lines from any other political figure is he'll go in front of audiences and say, look, I want every single one of you to get out there and vote 10 times. And people get kind of uncomfortable. They sit and sort of shuffle their chairs a little bit. They laugh a little bit. Well, we're Republicans. We don't vote 10 times. We only vote once. Well, here's the way to legally vote 10 times. Take yourself to the polls, but take 9 other people to the polls too. And that's what all of us, I encourage you, all of us to do. Maybe we'll take just a couple more questions, then we'll have to get on the road. Ma'am.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate it. I wanted to ask you about abortion. There was a story this week from ProPublica about 2 women in Georgia who died. They were trying to get abortions. You might have seen the story. And I wanted to ask you, firstly, the Harris campaign put out a statement about it this morning. I wanted to get your thoughts about the women. And then I also wanted to ask you policy-wise, if you see a role that the Trump administration can play in instances where states have abortion bans that limit or allow women who have medical reasons to get abortions, in this instance, out, like what the federal government can do in this instance.
Well, I haven't seen the story about two women. I saw a story about one woman in Georgia, and maybe it's the same story. I assume that that's at least half of the story. And I mean, look, my initial reaction to it is what an unbelievable and terrible human tragedy. I mean, you got this beautiful young girl, beautiful young child, and this boy's mom has been taken from him. And I don't know that any person in this country would say that's anything other than a terrible tragedy. She should be with her son. She should be still with us. And it's a terrible, terrible thing that she isn't. Now, I will also say that we have to remember that these things are extremely complicated. And I don't know the full details of exactly what happened, but one of the reasons why every single person, whether they're pro-life or pro-choice in this country, I've never spoken to a single pro-life person who doesn't believe in exceptions to cover this exact scenario. Where you have a pregnancy that is endangering a woman's life, it is a terrible, terrible tragedy, but you've got to let that woman make the decision that makes the most sense for her. It's called the life of the mother exception. Every single pro-life person, even people who are very, very hardcore on the pro-life issue, they believe in a life of the mother exception. So I'd like to learn a little bit more about this case and understand the details a little bit better, but it's an unspeakable tragedy. It should never happen in this country, and that's why we believe on the pro-life side in the life of the mother exception.
Hi, Senator. It's Kit again. Thanks for taking my question. I want to go back to what you said about believing that Trump needs the same security detail as Biden. Do you know if there's efforts underway to make that happen? And have you specifically requested more Secret Service protection?
So, Kit, I have not requested more Secret Service protection. I think that we have what we need. And again, we've, I think these guys are doing a great job, and I'm thankful for them, and I'm proud of them. And now, sometimes I wish they would drive a little bit faster. I mean, these Secret Service agents, they drive like Miss Daisy, and I'm trying to see, well, I got Matt to laugh a little bit here. But they do not go faster than 68 miles per hour on the highway. I'd like to change that, Kid. But otherwise, no changes to my Secret Service detail. But in terms of what's going on with President Trump, I do not know, to be clear, whether the president, meaning President Trump, has requested additional protection. I've talked to some of my friends on Capitol Hill where they're trying to find ways to appropriate money so that he has a security detail that maps up with President Biden's security detail. That's as much as I know. I don't know how likely those things are to be successful. But look, my pitch to my Democratic friends who, a lot of them, by the way, I think will vote for Donald Trump in November. But even let's say Democratic leadership that has made hating Donald Trump the whole reason of their existence in politics, what I'd say is assassinations destroy the social fabric of this country. I mean, we're very proud on our side to have the support of Bobby Kennedy Jr. And he's a great guy. I've gotten to know him very well over the last few weeks. But I think in many ways, this country never healed from the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And yeah, there were a lot of people who didn't like Bobby Kennedy. There were a lot of people who loved him. But whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, if an assassin takes out a presidential candidate in the midst of this election, it is going to cause a rift and a wound in this country that will be so deep it will never heal. So we cannot let this happen. We cannot let another person take a credible shot at Donald Trump's life. It's disgraceful, and we can do more to protect him. And I think that we have to do more to protect him, not just for his sake, but for the sake of the American people and our shared project as American citizens. So let me leave you with just this final thought here. And again, thank you all for being here. But there was a story that dominated headlines last week. It was actually a story in southwestern Ohio, about 45 minutes from where I grew up, a town called Springfield, Ohio. And what happened in Springfield, I think, is an example of what Kamala Harris's open border, what she wants to do to every small town and big city in this country, which is over the last few years, 20,000 migrants, primarily from Haiti, have been dropped into Springfield, Ohio. And it's caused an incredible stress on nearly every local service. You've got public schools where there are 1,000 kids in a small town, 1,000 kids who don't speak English. You've got local hospitals and clinics that are totally overwhelmed. You've got 8,000 people on the Medicaid rolls that weren't even in the community just 3 short years ago. And you've got a lot of people getting evicted from their homes to make way for people who are receiving government benefits. The idea of kicking American citizens out of their homes for non-citizens who are receiving a welfare check is disgraceful, and it shouldn't happen. It is an absolute disgrace. But President Trump and I have been talking about this issue. We're going to keep on talking about this issue because all over the country, I just saw a story about a small town in Pennsylvania where something else similar is happening. You've got a massive influx of migrants. You've got people who now can't afford housing. And in the name of Kamala Harris's open border, you are destroying the American dream of home ownership and home security. It is a disgrace. But I want to tell you what's even more disgraceful. What's even more disgraceful than the policy is the effort to silence the residents of Springfield. I've seen this from the American media, a lot of people who pretend to be fair journalists. You know what they've been saying? For the last few days, Springfield has been experiencing an unbelievable number, something like 35, 40 bomb threats in Springfield in just the last few days. And you know what the governor of Ohio came out yesterday and said? Every single one of those bomb threats was a hoax. And all of those bomb threats came from foreign countries. So the American media for 3 days has been lying and saying that Donald Trump and I are inciting bomb threats, when in reality, the American media has been laundering foreign disinformation. It is disgusting. And every single one of them owes the residents of Springfield an apology. But I think it illustrates something, my friends, that is so sick from the American press in 2024. And it's that instead of talking about the crises in our country, they try to silence the people who are experiencing them. Because their message in talking about these bomb threats and in lying to the American people and saying they came from me and Donald Trump, what they're doing is trying to shut all of us up. They're trying to say, how dare you, citizens of Springfield, complain about this migrant inflow because now these bomb threats are happening. How dare you complain about the fact that you can't afford housing? How dare you complain about Kamala's open border? The media conspired to shut American citizens up. They owe every single American an apology, and they ought to. And after giving every single American an apology, why don't they think about covering the real crisis, which is Kamala's open border and its many, many victims? Focus on the real story, American media. Stop trying to shut up the people who are telling the real story. Do your job. Cover what's going on in this race, and the American people will be better off for it. So, with gratitude to all of you and with gratitude to the state of Michigan, I want to ask you to do everything that you can over the 7 weeks that we have left in this campaign. Knock on doors if you can. Call neighbors if you can. Get your friends and family out to the polls. We have got 7 days to save this country, and it's going to start in the great state of Michigan. God bless you guys. Thank you for having me.
Why don't we liberate these United States? We're the ones who need it worst. Let the rest of the world help us for change, and let